Initial injury reports from both the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Miami Dolphins as they get set to face off in Week 5 of the 2021 NFL season. Updated Locked On NFL Power Rankings, and it's crossover Thursday. Kyle Krabs of the Locked On Dolphins podcast is here to tell Bucs fans what to expect this weekend from the Miami Dolphins.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bucs Nation? Welcome to today's episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast. Thank you for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen every day. And remember, this podcast, as all podcasts are on the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available on platforms, including YouTube, which if you're staring at my face right now, you already know that. If you're listening, head over to YouTube. Please check us out. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Let us know you're watching. Let us know what you think. Thanks again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen every day. Today, guys, we're talking about injury reports. The first injury reports coming out from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Miami Dolphins as they get set for their Week 5 matchup. Miami coming in 1-3, disappointed. The Buccaneers coming in 3-1. A little bit of disappointment, a lot of injuries to deal with, but still 3-1 after 4 games. A lot of teams would love to be in that position. Speaking of injury reports, we'll get to that. And then Kyle Krabs of the Locked On Dolphins podcast is going to join us here in just a little bit as we get crossover Thursday underway. But first, let's kick things off with that injury report for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A long list of star-studded players not participating in practice on Wednesday. Cornerback Carlton Davis III, tight end Rob Gronkowski, defensive lineman Patrick O'Connor, safety Antoine Winfield Jr. Of course, Carlton Davis and Antoine Winfield Jr., guys, probably, frankly, don't expect them to play. Kyle and I get a little into that a little bit here later in the episode. Rob Gronkowski, also a guy that you're probably not looking forward to seeing this weekend. Most likely limited participants for the Bucs. Running back Giovani Bernard, cornerback Jamel Dean, outside linebacker Jason Pierre-Paul. So that's a little bit of good news coming back to practice from that shoulder and hand injury. So hopefully he can make it through and possibly return. Although Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, the rookie outside linebacker, has been doing some good things while JPP has been on the mend. Full participants, but listed with injuries. Wide receiver Antonio Brown with a knee. Wide receiver Chris Godwin with a thumb. Again, full participants. So as long as that status doesn't change, you don't expect too much this weekend to come off the field in that category. The Miami Dolphins not participating. Cornerback Byron Jones. Kyle talks about the importance of Byron getting healthy. He's listed with a quad and Achilles injury. If he can't go, the Miami Dolphins secondary are going to be severely undermanned, dealing with the likes of Mike Evans, Godwin, AB, and more. Limited participants for the Dolphins. Wide receiver Devontae Parker, tight end Adam Shaheen. Full participants, cornerback Xavien Howard, and safety Brandon Jones. So that is your updated injury report as of Wednesday, coming out of both the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Miami Dolphins camps. Of course, we've got 2 more injury updates coming before the weekend. One more that we'll recap here on the Locked On Bucs podcast as James and I come back tomorrow with our final preview, some of our projections, our bulletins, stuff like that for you here at the Locked On Bucs podcast. Let's flip over real quick to the Locked On NFL Power Rankings. NFL hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network coming together, dropping their anonymous rankings, anonymous so that you can be truthful with how you feel and what you think. And we've got a new set here for Week 5. The Buffalo Bills taking over the top spot there after a 40-0 whooping of the Houston Texans. Yeah, it's the Houston Texans, but still, it's 40-0, guys, of an NFL team. It's still impressive, no matter how you slice it. The Arizona Cardinals moving into 3rd place, but remaining behind the Bucs and the Bills, despite the Cardinals being the only undefeated team left in the NFL. That made some noise on social media. Obviously, Cardinals fans not happy about it. A lot of questions, and I think you basically have to chalk it up to the fact that they started off, I think, like 15, somewhere around there. So as they move up and as they continue to win, they'll continue to move up. So Cardinals hands out there. Look, if your team goes 5-0, they have a very good chance of being in that number 1 spot next week. Just be patient. It's okay. Cowboys, Chargers, they make their first appearances in the top 10. The Panthers and Patriots both move up despite having lost in Week 4. So some credit for having good games, good showings against better teams there for both the Panthers and the Patriots. Again, recapping the top 5, the Buffalo Bills take the number 1 spot. The Bucs have the 2nd spot. The Arizona Cardinals in 3rd. For noting, purposes, the Buccaneers highest ranked in the power rankings, first place, and they were also ranked 8th place. That was their lowest spot. The Cardinals had a first place ranking, was their highest ranking, and 8th place was also their lowest ranking as well. So somebody really not buying into what the Arizona Cardinals are doing right now. Los Angeles Rams are in 4th place. The Baltimore Ravens in 5th. Going around the NFC South, Carolina Panthers sit at 15th place. The New Orleans Saints sit at 17th place, which is interesting because last week it was the Saints at 15, the Panthers at 17. So those two swapping, even though both lost. The Panthers again rising from 17 to 15 after their loss. And the Atlanta Falcons losing to the Washington football team stay steady at 27. This weekend's opponent for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Miami Dolphins, fall to number 26 from 23 following their disappointing loss to the Indianapolis Colts. That is going to wrap up our injury report update and the Locked On Power rankings ahead of Week 5 in the 2021 NFL season. That and this show have been brought to you by our friends over at rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it is literally impossible for your local chain store or car dealership to stock all the parts you're ever going to want. I've tested it. I actually went to a local car part shop, a very popular one. I'm not going to call them out by name. And they didn't have what I needed. I called up the local Chrysler dealership for my vehicle. They didn't have what I needed either. So I had to go online and I had to go to friends of ours like those at rockauto.com who have literally everything you could ever want, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck right locked on there. How did you hear about us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Crossover Thursday here at the Locked On Podcast Network, and the defending Super Bowl champions. I don't know how much longer we're going to continue to say that, but the defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming into this matchup, hosting the Miami Dolphins in Raymond James Stadium this weekend. David Harrison for the Locked On Bucs podcast at dharrison82 on Twitter. Kyle Krabs of the Locked On Dolphins podcast at Grinding the Tape. Kyle also hosts the Draft Dudes podcast. Make sure you check that out if you want to be a draft expert, director of scouting at the Draft Network. Me, I also write for BucsNation.com, so more Bucs coverage from me if you're interested. Kyle, I mean, first things first, the Buccaneers are currently 10-point favorites to win this game over at our friends, betonline.ag. We're going to dive into some of how that game might be won or lost by both sides, obviously. But first, how did this Dolphins team end up where they're at right now? Consider this is a 10-win team in 2020. Now they've got half as many losses as they had all last season. Obviously, Tua is injured, but I feel like there were probably some issues even before Tua went down, heading into what can't be considered a very good showing from Jacoby Brissett last weekend.
Yeah. First of all, if I were defending Super Bowl champions, I would use it until there is a new Super Bowl champion outright. So
Yeah,
ride that horse, man, and don't surrender that until you have to. But yeah, obviously Miami, very disappointing 1-3 start to the season. And some of the more optimistic Dolphins fans out there would look at some of the plays that were left on the field by Jacoby Brissett the last 2 weeks, as you mentioned, and might feel as though Miami had a reasonable chance to win both the Raiders game and the Colts game. And they were certainly games that were there for the taking. But I think that's the biggest difference between last year's team and this year's team. Is last year's team was very opportunistic. They played smart and disciplined and didn't beat themselves. And this year's team, they're jumping off sides on a 4th-and-3 punt without a punt block called and giving Indianapolis a first down, and they go down and score 7 points. And it kind of injects momentum. And Jakeem Grant doesn't field a punt. He loses 15 yards of field position. He tries to make it up later in the game by catching a punt that he's running up on late, and he ends up muffing the punt and giving the ball back to the Colts inside their own 20-yard line. So just brutal mistakes for Miami. They've not taken to the mantra of Brian Flores, and I think that's the most concerning thing. Obviously, the injuries to Tua Tagovaiola and Michael Dieter on the offensive side of the ball, and Raekwon Davis, who may be back for this game against Tampa Bay, those hurt, right? But if you're the 8th most penalized team in football after being in the bottom 3 for each of the first 2 years of the Brian Flores era, you got a problem. And you know, I don't know if they're pressing. I'm not quite sure what the root of that is. But that's something that I discussed over at the Draft Network. I ended up dropping like 2,000 words of therapy into a story talking about this issue. And it was everything in Miami is an unknown variable. You have no stability. You have no kind of anchors to be able to assess and kind of get to the root of whatever the issues are on this team. So I don't envy Brian Flores and Chris Greer. And at the end of the year, if they don't get this thing turned around, Stephen Ross for trying to vet and figure out what the heck is going on.
Yeah, and I mean, coming for this weekend, you mentioned some of the injuries that they've already suffered, and Monday, Ian Rappaport of NFL Media reporting that wide receiver Will Fuller is expected to be out weeks, using the multiple term there. So Miami's gonna be without him. Obviously, they're still gonna be without Tua Tagovailoa. So Jacoby Brissett, as far as I know, right, expected to be the starter. How do you feel about this version of this Dolphins offense going up against this version of the Buccaneers defense? Really, not the same version that we saw win the Super Bowl this last February, with especially considering that secondary has a lot of injuries, looking really thin. And Richard Sherman, who 51 overall grade in PFF for what that's worth to those who follow those grades last weekend. Now he'll have a full week of practice, but how much more he can get caught up is still to be determined. So how do you feel about this version of the Dolphins offense facing this version of the Buccaneers defense?
I mean, I have my gripes with the offensive staff, and Miami currently is implementing co-offensive coordinators, and neither one of them is the guy that's actually in the helmet of the quarterback at the snap. That's the quarterback's coach. So you're playing whisper down the alley, trying to get the play call rallied into the quarterback.
Yeah.
So there's some spacing issues that I have some concerns with. I would like to, you went out and got all these 320, 330 pound offensive linemen, and you don't really have any level of commitment to running the football. With Jacoby Brissett in the game, I'd like to see them do that. I don't think they're going to have any success doing that against the Bucs front, regardless of how often we see Jason Pierre-Paul or not. They just can't consistently get push up front in the running game. So I have my gripes with the play calling, but they've been calling up a fair amount of opportunities to take some shots down the field. And I went back and counted and just got done yesterday watching the all-22 of the Dolphins offense against the Colts. I had 15 routine reads, plays, throws out of this. So about half of the plays that Jacoby Brissett took for Miami against Indianapolis, just missing basic stuff. Yeah. So from an execution standpoint, Brian Flores said we're going to avoid trying to make wholesale changes because we think it's an execution problem. And I think they do have some schematic issues. I do think they have some personnel limitations, but it's really hard to evaluate this Dolphins offense because Jacoby Brissett, for being a 6-year quarterback with 1,100 career pass attempts in the NFL, like, I just don't know what you're looking at to make some of the decisions you're making with the ball.
Yeah, it definitely didn't look good. I saw some of the tweets that you sent out, and some other people have even sent them out. And I think the best one I saw, which actually the worst one I saw, if you're a Dolphins fan, right, is two guys running wide open over the middle of the field. And I think he ends up checking it down after looking at both those guys running wide
Max
open.
protect deep shot. We're running. Yeah. We're throwing the check down.
Yeah, it's crazy to see, especially from an NFL quarterback. So I mean, talking about that with Jacoby Brissett, I mean, any chance we see Reed Sinnett or Sennett, however you say that, in this game if Jacoby doesn't get going early in this one?
So Brian Flores was asked that after the game on Sunday. Was there any consideration given to turning the keys over to Jacoby or to Reed Sinnett throughout the course of the game against the Colts? And he offered a one-word answer, and it was no, and that was it. So I doubt it. I get, the Tua Tagovailoa is reportedly going to be back in week 6 against Jacksonville. So right. I don't know that they do anything crazy. I don't know how you can make it easier to execute slant flat and man-to-man coverage and nobody capping the slant running in the middle of the field. And Will Fuller's got nobody within 4 yards of him. I don't know how to make that any easier. So I wouldn't rule anything out. Brian Flores has not been afraid to mix things up as necessary, but at this point in time, it seems like they're pretty steadfast in Jacoby being the guy there.
It'll be interesting to see. A lot of quarterbacks have done some things against this very banged up Buccaneers defense so far that people didn't expect them to necessarily do. But talking about the Miami Dolphins defense here, I think things are going better on the defensive side of the ball, right, than they are the offensive side of the ball there in Miami. And we just saw the Patriots defense and Tom Brady's homecoming there on Sunday Night Football really kind of commit to ensuring that Tom Brady couldn't beat him in the normal fashion. They overloaded pass coverage, especially inside the red zone, to the point where a Buccaneers tight end that was on the practice squad the week leading up to the game was getting double covered in the red zone. That's how much the Patriots were going to make sure all those receivers were covered. How do you think Miami stacks up against this Buccaneers offense? What do you think they need to do what the Patriots did, hold them under 20 points for what would be the third straight week?
Yeah, I think Miami, they're going to have to hope for good news with Byron Jones. He's played phenomenal football early on this season. He only played 35% of the snaps against the Colts with a quad injury. He spent the second half on the bike on the sideline trying to keep it loose. He did not practice in the open portion of practice on Wednesday, so we're not sure if we're going to have him. Kind of the domino effect there is I would not be surprised if he doesn't play to have Nick Needham on the outside, who has played phenomenal. And he was a guy who I was ready to bump into just a depth role this past offseason. He's really taken a big step forward, primarily in the nickel these past few weeks. Wouldn't be surprised to see some Jason McCourty sprinkled in at corner as well. That's one thing about this Dolphins team is I do think between the safeties that they have and the corners that they have, they can be very multiple to go with big nickel situations or get a lot of corners on the field if they feel they need to match and go man-to-man. But they're probably going to continue to be the team that they've been all season long, which is despite the fact that they've made some improvements up front with Adam Butler and Jalen Phillips, who was phenomenal against the Colts, they're a team that continues to blitz at one of the highest rates in the NFL. So they lead the NFL in quarterback hits, has not translated to sacks at this point in time, but I think they'll probably try to play in the face of some of these receivers, disrupt the timing in the release, and try and get to a non-mobile. Don't mean that with any disrespect to the GOAT, but Tom Brady's not known for being the most fleet of foot. If you can keep him in the pocket and you can contain and kind of collapse and get in his face a little bit, maybe you could get a couple tip balls and force some turnovers, which is one of the few gimmicks that this Dolphins team has left their riding, is this turnover streak that's like 27 games or something like that at this point in time, consecutive.
Yeah, I mean, Brady might have had the NFL's longest 6-yard scramble in the history of the league last weekend against New England Patriots. So I don't think anybody's going to take offense to that. And look, Jalen Phillips is a guy that a lot of Buccaneers people wanted the team to target in the NFL draft there. I think my co-host James and I, in our ultimate mock draft, I think we actually went Jalen Phillips for the Buccaneers. So, no surprise really to see him doing some good things there in Miami. And then 2 questions, last Dolphins question for you, Kyle. Who's the Dolphin that you think needs to really step up, have an A game for Miami to have a chance to come out of this thing not going 1-4?
I think Jalen Waddle needs to break a couple of these receptions, and he was very close to doing so against Indianapolis. He caught 3 balls early on in the first 5-6 minutes of the football game and hardly saw a target the rest of the way. So it wasn't necessarily a fault of his. He got open. He was he was running the deep cross, that 18 to 20 yard cross one you mentioned on that kind of schemed max protect shot play down the field. But he's one of the top receivers in the NFL in separation. And I understand they're running him in the short areas of the field quite a bit. But I think this Dolphins offense, it's kind of constipated, right? And if they're going to loosen it up and they're going to get some chunk plays, I think somebody is going to have to make somebody miss in short space and turn it into a long game. So no Will Fuller. He went on IR on Wednesday, and he's a little bit more of a true vertical receiver anyway. I think Jalen Waddle's probably somebody that you're going to have to get a good break with the ball in somebody's hands, and Waddle seems like the most logical guy to do it.
Yeah, sounds like a good pick. And then I've got a Buccaneers question for you, actually. Your Twitter bio says that you're a very avid fan of nose tackles.
We talking
the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We think we have the best one in the NFL, Vita Vea. And I mean, we actually just did an episode that dropped on Tuesday highlighting the fact that Vita Vea was perhaps one of the most impactful players of that win over the New England Patriots, despite the fact that you will not find his name in the stat box. So if you could just give Bucs fans your opinion of Vita Vea here and so far through the 2021 season in his career, really.
Yeah, so Vita is guilty of making me feel smaller than any other human being has in my entire life. I'm in Indianapolis at the Combine the year that he's coming out, and back behind where they have the podiums to do the interviews, they have restrooms. And I'm back there and washing my hands at the sink, and I just see this big shadow come up over me, and he's washing his hands at the sink next to me, and I realize who it is, and I'm like, this is the most enormous human being I have ever laid eyes on. And then you watch him on the football field and you see how dynamic he is, how powerful his hands are, how he can win with finesse, but he can also win with power. And he's a rare breed, man. And I know that selection at the time was kind of eyebrow raising. Like, really? Like, you're going to go with an interior defensive lineman who's probably a true nose at the next level with a top 20 selection, but he's been worth it for Tampa Bay. And he is a unicorn amongst unicorns for a nose tackle, but a disruptor at nose tackle. So a lot of respect for him. And I don't have any question. He's going to make life hell for this Miami Dolphins interior offensive line.
Absolutely has been so far. And you have a lot of respect for him. And we have a lot of respect for you, Kyle Krabs, at Grinding the Tape on Twitter, host of Locked On Dolphins and the Draft Dudes podcast at the Draft Network. We're going to take a quick second to let some of our friends share some messages with our audience. And then Kyle is going to come back and grill me about the defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Today's episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast brought to you by BetOnline. and better than ever. All eyes on the gridiron as football's back. College and pro, and betonline.ag is your number one spot with even more odds, props, contests, a new updated site, and brand new interface. Betonline.ag continues to be your number one source for everything football. Head to the website today, sign up using the promo code Locked On when you make your first deposit, and you'll get a 50% deposit bonus just for signing up with the promo code Locked On. From football, basketball, boxing, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait. Take advantage of all the offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
We are back on a crossover Thursday edition here on the Locked On Network. I'm Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins at Grinding the Tape with David Harrison of Locked On Bucs, D Harrison 82 on Twitter. So David, you were very kind. I appreciate that. A lowly 1-3 football team coming into this matchup, and I've been licking my wounds for about 2 weeks now, and I've kind of told my listener base amongst Dolphins fans, we're kind of putting the evaluation hat on, and there's no better way to evaluate what you have and the players on your roster than to go against the cream of the crop. And I understand last year is last year, and each one of these teams is new, but as we mentioned, this is the defending Super Bowl champions with Tom Brady and Bruce Arians and this high-flying offense. And so I guess the first thing I would kind of just like to get a feel for is what's the temperature in Tampa Bay about the performance of the team versus expectations. They obviously brought so many players back from last year's Super Bowl champion team, and they started slow, right? 7-5 before they got hot and ran the table from there. So what's kind of the feel in Tampa Bay about the first 4 weeks of the season for the Bucs thus far?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. A little bit of just kind of cautious optimism and kind of just staying the course. And I think there's this growing confidence about this Buccaneers team that really hasn't been a part of this fan base for a very long time. That even through struggles and even through bad luck and bad breaks and bad bounces, this team can still come through and win. For one, can win games, but they can also get to the tournament at the end of the regular season. That's really what it's all about here in the regular season. Once you get there, we all know anything can happen. So it's really just about getting to the playoffs. And there's a quiet confidence that, even if Antonio Brown is missing from a game or Rob Gronkowski or whoever, the defense is banged up, this team is going to find a way to win. But then there's another part of the Buccaneers fan base that wants blood, to be quite honest with you. They wanted to see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers come out, return all 22 starters and quite a few of their role players as well, and come out and just kind of impose their will on people throughout the season. And they're just not quite seeing that during some of this. I mean, especially the Dallas Cowboys matchup with Dak Prescott coming back from in his first game. I mean, I also expected some rust out of Dak. I think he's impressed pretty much everybody that's seen him return to the field this year. But then you even go into last weekend against New England, and even with the weather, and even with the defensive injuries, people expected, some people expected the Buccaneers to really kind of handle that New England Patriots team. But I think they learned what a lot of people already knew, and that the New England Patriots defense is really a very stout unit. And Mac Jones has looked well above what I think a lot of people evaluated him at being ready for NFL football coming out of Alabama this year. So some of it's injury, some of it's other things, obviously, but for the most part, you have nobody that's super excited, even though they're 3-1. Their only loss coming to the Rams, but you have a lot of people that are kind of just staying steady with the flow and waiting for another big matchup to prove themselves, and some who are not hitting the panic button, but they're hovering over it.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you about the Bucs on the offensive side of the football
Mhm.
is run defense has been problematic for Miami through the first 4 games of the season, and it's largely chunk gains. They've gotten gouged in each of the 4 games that they've played thus far, and just looking at the raw rushing production for Tampa, hasn't been a lot of activity. They went up over 100 yards for the first time
Mhm.
this past weekend. 112 rushing yards, I believe, was their team total. So. Is that something you think is kind of circumstantial based on the games that you guys have played to this point in the season? Or are you looking at the running game in Tampa Bay and saying, hey, there might be a cause for concern or kind of a weakness here that we have to kind of monitor over the next couple of weeks and get a feel for our team in this regard?
Yeah, it's definitely the weakness of the offense is that running game. And Leonard Fournette has looked better, I think, every week this season. And I kind of chronicled that over at BucsNation.com. Right now, he out touches everybody else on the offense from a skill position standpoint. You expect that of a running back, but in this system, you kind of expect that running back spread to be a little bit more even. He's got more touches than all the other running backs on this roster combined. And with the addition of Giovanni Bernard, granted he missed last week due to an injury, but then Ronald Jones coming in as that kind of quote unquote starting running back, you really wouldn't expect such a wide margin of touches between Leonard Fournette and the rest of the group. But he's kind of earned it, and every time the Buccaneers have turned more to him, he's kind of answered it with proving them to be intelligent people. And he still got his flaws. He still drops some passes. Bruce Arians talked about that earlier this week and says, those drops, their concentration, and I think a lot of them are his efforts. He knows he's not a Christian McCaffrey. He's not, he's not a guy who's going to catch the ball and make a whole lot of people miss. So he's trying to get in to his post catch, motions and football activities, as they call it, to get as much yardage as he can for his team. You just got to realize that the first step is catching the ball. The next step is doing something with it, and I think that's something that he's developing coming on with. Ronald Jones keeps missing blitz pickups, and that's going to keep continuing him or continue to keep him on the sidelines there. But we saw the Patriots focus on stopping Tom Brady and not letting him use guys like Cam Brate, missing Rob Gronkowski was obviously big. And they kind of made the Buccaneers run the ball more than we've really seen them run in a long time. Fortunately, it worked out. I mean, it's a 3-point win or not even a 3-point win, less than a 3-point win. At the end of the game, Nick Folk has a chance to potentially give the Patriots one of the bigger upsets of the season. He just misses that field goal. So you have to be a little concerned given that the first time the team really was forced to focus on the run game, they kind of narrowly came away with the victory. But at the same time, there's a little bit of promise there because Leonard Fournette is getting better week in, week out. And I think the more comfortable and the more confident he gets, the better off he's going to be for this offense.
So follow up on that is I'm glad you had mentioned kind of the weakness on the offense. And my question comes from a Miami scope, but needs your expertise to answer the question, which is if you were on the opposing sideline and you were trying to craft kind of here's the flow of how the game needs to unfold for us to win the football game against Tampa Bay with, so much experience. And obviously they have some injuries they're dealing with right now, but what key variables are you trying to isolate and accentuate that you feel like if an opposing team tried to do it would give them the best chance to win a football game against the Bucs?
You gotta keep everything in front of you. Like bottom line is you have to keep everything, I think, in front of the second level. Your linebackers and your safeties and your cornerbacks have to be able to run downhill to make a stop on the football. You're gonna give up a lot of yards. You're probably gonna have some extended drives. Your defense is gonna be on the field for a long time. But again, kind of looking at what the New England Patriots were able to do. The Rams kind of came out and almost bullied the Buccaneers. Really, it really kind of showed how important that game was to the Rams versus the Buccaneers, who were, I don't want to say they were taking it lightly, but they were kind of it was more just a big regular season game. Whereas for the Rams, it was a very big statement opportunity for them. But the New England Patriots showed it as well. They're going to get in the red zone, but if you can keep them to field goals, I mean, everybody talks about field goals don't win games. Then you just have to turn it over to your offense. I know that's a little bit of a concern there in Miami, but I think that's kind of the best opportunity because if you try to get a little overly aggressive and stop the short stuff, with guys like Antonio Brown and even some of those tight ends that get in there in the middle part of the field, you're eventually going to get caught short and you're eventually going to get hit over the top with some Antonio Brown. Again, we can talk about him. Chris Godwin obviously has some deeper ability. I mean, Mike Evans has even been known to go out there and grab an explosive player to himself over a DB. So that's really what the Buccaneers want you to do is they kind of want to hit you with body blows and then wait for you to really get into that defensive mode and try to shrink down and then take advantage and nail you with that uppercut. So I think discipline in defensive scheme, discipline in play, because the key, of course, is once again the red zone. You got to keep them out of the end zone. If you let them into the red zone and then they score, well, it's not really going to work out well for you anyway.
My last question is pertained to injury and availability, and you've mentioned that the Bucs are a little banged up and have been dealing with some injuries in the secondary, and obviously Gronkowski couldn't play in this past game. So, who are the players that you have the vibe are going to be back, aren't going to be back? Who are the key pieces that are kind of up in the air for Tampa Bay, and what way do you expect to see them going based on trends early on this week?
Yeah, I think Carlton Davis and Rob Gronkowski are two guys that you kind of pretty much expect to be out. Antoine Winfield as well. Bruce Arians has already kind of said it's going to be really tough sledding to get him through concussion protocol. And concussion protocol is not something you want to try to pull games with or tricks or rush anybody through. So he's most likely out as well. Jamel Dean practiced all week last week. Didn't play. It wasn't necessarily a huge surprise, but a little bit of a surprise because he did practice. So if he can practice all week, this week leading up to this game, then you figure he'll probably be out there with guys like Richard Sherman, Ross Cockrell, who's actually the highest rated cornerback of that win in that win over the New England Patriots. So he did a little bit better than we've seen him do over weeks before. So you're probably looking at Richard Sherman, Ross Cockrell, Pierre Desir, and Jamel Dean if he can go in that secondary, not the star-studded lineup or not the grave diggers that they coined themselves as in that Super Bowl run. I think that obviously plays into Miami's hands a little bit if they want to try to get this upset. And then at safety, you're looking at Mike Edwards replacing Antoine Winfield Jr. and tight end. Cam Brate, OJ Howard mostly held in as a blocker last week. Cody McElroy, keep calling him Greg McElroy. Cody McElroy got out there for some routes. Again, the Pats double teamed him, so as surprised as everybody was that Cody McElroy is getting doubled. But they'll definitely try to keep the tight ends on the field and try to use them as well. But those are probably the guys that you're looking at facing, along with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Antonio Brown.
Great stuff here on another Locked On crossover edition. Kyle Krabs, David Harrison, Dolphins at Bucs. A big game for Miami to try and keep their season alive. It's their aspirations for the year on life support. Tampa Bay looking to continue rolling some momentum into through their early season successes. We thank each and every one of you for tuning in here on the Locked On Network. It's your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you guys again soon.
All right, guys, once again for Kyle Krabs at Grinding the Tape on Twitter, host of the Locked On Dolphins podcast, and for myself, David Harrison on Twitter at dharrison82, one of the hosts here at the Locked On Bucs podcast. Thank you for listening to this crossover episode, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Both Kyle and I, both Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Bucs, are on YouTube. We thank you again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen every day. Come back tomorrow as James Yarko and I will be back for our final game preview of this Week 5 matchup between the Buccaneers and the Miami Dolphins. We're going to have more injury updates. We're going to have projections. We're going to have predictions. We're going to have all kinds of craziness and fun going down before we get set for kickoff this weekend. For your second listen, make Peacock and Williamson NFL show your next stop. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes, and it's free and available on all platforms. If you've got questions or takes or topics that you want to share with James and I, your own predictions, your own bold predictions, players of the game, send them in to lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com or call in, leave a voicemail, and be part of the show at 813-444-5841. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and thank you for joining me right here at Locked On Bucs.